Howdy, y'all, and welcome yourselves to another episode of Goat Movies, the podcast for the simple Southern movie lover, where we discuss movies we've recently seen and see if they have what it takes to become the greatest of all time. So what exactly makes a goat movie? Is it quotable? Is it lovable? Is it any-able? Well, I guess y'all find out today. On today's show, we'll be discussing a Southern movie, Blaze, by Ethan Hawke. Okay, enough with that. On today's show, we've got a returning guest, Andrew Greco. What's going on, Andrew?
Nothing much. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well, it's scary. It has been almost 4 or 5 days since we went and saw this week's movie, and I am still grinning from ear to ear because of what happened.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome. So just to get on today's show, just to start off, we were able to go and review the movie Blaze. It's about a Texas songwriter named Blaze Foley, and I had never actually heard about this artist before I got the invite to come screen this movie. Had you heard about this guy?
No, I had never heard of him, and I had only really kind of like offhandedly heard about the movie itself. Like, I was scrolling through some trailers a couple of weeks ago, and I saw the trailer on there, and I saw that it was directed by Ethan Hawke, and so I was like, oh, that looks interesting, and so I watched the trailer, and I was kind of like, oh, I'll get a chance to see that movie whenever, it comes out on iTunes, because there's no way a small little, like, low-budget movie like that's ever going to get a wide enough release for, like, it to come out in a theater near me. Mm-hmm. But then, like, 3 days later, you sent me the text. It's like, hey.
Yeah. So what's really great about all this, and the reason I'm grinning from ear to ear, and even as I'm recording this, I'm still getting super excited, is that the director of this movie, Ethan Hawke, actually made an appearance at the screening. He was there to do a little question and answer round with everybody that was there, and the main character, Blaze Foley, is portrayed by Benjamin Dickey, an actual musician who Ethan Hawke chose for this role. And this is just kind of like the beginning of everything for me. Being invited to go screen these movies was step one. And I was actually just getting, like these passes. I didn't know that this world even existed. Andrew, I'm sure you knew a little bit more about this, but a lot of movie theaters have these like pre-screenings to get people's input to try and build hype on social media. And so they give away these first come first serve screening tickets, and they're actually free, and you can find a lot of them. But these are typically reserved primarily for press and for critics. And so I have been fortunate enough to be added to that list, and Andrew and I were able to go screen this movie. So that to me was one of the biggest things, is that now not only do I go screen movies along with other people, but now I'm considered part of the press, which Andrew and I were pretty fortunate enough to go and see that.
Moving up in the world, man. Moving up in the world.
Baby steps. And that's the thing, is like, it's just pursuing your dream. And it's so great that we got to review this movie in particular, because Blaze Foley is a man who just loved music. That was his purpose in life. That's what he was here for, was to make music. And, we'll go more into detail after the spoiler alerts. And this one's going to be kind of difficult just because, A, there's a limited release on this movie. B, it's about a true person. So it's kind of like when I went to go see the Steve Jobs movie with my cousin. As we were buying our tickets, he goes, spoiler alert, Steve Jobs dies in the end. And this was like years after he had died, So, I mean, it's kind of difficult to say that this is going to be a spoiler alert. But just like Andrew said, this is going to be limited release. It opens here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area starting August 24th, the Magnolia in Dallas and the River Oaks Theater in Houston. It opens on August 31st in my hometown of El Paso at the Alamo Drafthouse Cinema in Monticello. So for all my El Paso peeps, all my friends here in Dallas-Fort Worth, I highly, highly encourage you to go see this movie. just because it was so interesting. But for me, more importantly, I want to start off with a little story. And Andrew, feel free to jump in whenever you want. Andrew and I get there. There's a bunch of people there for the screening, and it's a lot of people who do this all the time. They're signed up for these movie reviews. They're signed up for these groups, and it's a first come first serve basis. So I have to give a big shout out to Allied. Allied is the one that was sponsoring this for us. And I had received an email from Allied, and they said, hey, we have this movie. If you want to come see it, send me your information. And they have these Google documents that you have to fill out, right? So I fill out the Google documents. They ask me how many people I want to go with. And, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to ruin it for me going forward. So I say, well, how many can I get? And they said, well, we typically only give out 2. So I said, okay, well, I'll take one for myself and I'll get one for my buddy Andrew here, because Andrew, you're in the movie business, right? Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know who else I'm going to take to this, right? And they had flat out said in the beginning, Ethan Hawke and Ben Bailey. Shout out Ben to my friend Ben Bailey, because he's been talking to me a lot about helping me advance the movie podcast, and so shout out Ben, love you, buddy. But the main character is portrayed by Ben Dickey. So, anyways, they were going to be there, and they were going to have a question and answer round for us. So Andrew and I are there. The woman who put this together, Tanya, she sends me an email and says, hey, you're on the VIP list. Just go up to the table and tell them your name, and we'll get you into the movie theater. So we get there. There's a bunch of people. They kind of started a little late, and so somebody gets there and they're like, hey, if you're with the press, come into this line over here. If you're on the list with the Google Docs, get in this line over here. Well, everybody goes to the Google Docs, and here I was a little disappointed. I'm like, man, she said Google Docs, I did Google Docs. So I thought I thought I had made it up to the press pass, but obviously I hadn't. So Andrew and I get in line, right? And I tell Andrew, I'm like, Andrew, you think I'm with the press? And Andrew's like, well, I don't know. What did they tell you? So we're just kind of standing there, and then I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I'm just going to go over here, get in the press pass line. What's the worst they're going to tell me? Go to the back of the line, you're in the wrong line, right?
Because that line was like way shorter. Like there were 50 people in the Google Docs one, but there were like 3 people in the press pass line when we got in line.
Yeah, absolutely. So I get up to the front of the line and I tell them I'm Carlos Dominguez with Goat Movies, and she goes, oh yeah, here, you're the VIP line here. Here are your 2 passes. And I saw my name right next to the list that said Organization Goat Movies. And so that to me is just like, wow, this is really happening. So that was one huge reason that I'm smiling from ear to ear, because this is really what I want to do. I'm just so passionate about movies. I'm so passionate about this podcast. So I'm super, super excited about all of this. And so Andrew and I get our VIP passes. We get in our line. They let us go sit down. And so we go ahead and watch this movie. Afterwards, the movie finishes, and out comes Ethan Hawke, and we just have a great conversation with him. And it was just, this is what I want to do, guys. I'm just super, super excited. Even if this podcast doesn't make any money whatsoever, it's just lit the fire within me to go ahead. And I got to give you props, Andrew, because you love movies so much that you actually go into the business and you're doing what you love, and I mean, there's just not words to describe it of how awesome that is, and how much I envy somebody like you that does this for a living.
Yeah, definitely. Like I work on a very, very small scale. If you Google my name, you're not going to find my name on many like big projects or whatever. But I mean, we got
maybe on America's Most Wanted or something.
someday. But yeah, me and my friends, we've got a company, Negative Apples. We're slowly just, we're building up our business, but it's something we've worked in whatever capacity in, I guess, quote unquote, the industry for the past, I've probably been doing it for the past 8 years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, ever since I've known you, and I've been here for about 10 years, so yeah, absolutely. And some even bigger news, I just found out recently that you recently won an award for a movie that you made.
Yeah. We got to drive up to Indianapolis, Indiana. That was a good 15-hour road trip to Gen Con, which...
The private jet was being used, right? I'm assuming.
Yeah, that was out of commission for the weekend. But it was...
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was Gen Con. So Gen Con is a convention for like board games and card games. It's the largest one in the world. They have, I don't remember how many they had this year, but last year I think they said they had over 60,000 people show up to it. And they have all of these events for, just different whatever that's going on in the festival at the convention. And one of the events that they have is a film festival for like sci-fi fantasy type short films and feature films. And last year, me and my friends made a 11-minute horror short film that got into the festival. So we went up there last year, but we ended up making 3 more short films last year, and only one of them was like loosely considered to be something that would be sci-fi or fantasy. And so we were like, well, I mean, I guess we could just submit it to Gen Con because we just really want to go to Gen Con again because it's awesome. And so we submitted it, we got accepted, we got our passes, we went up there, and we ended up winning the they call it the Ovid Award, which is just a outstanding recognition award for a short film. And the way it works is they have their regular like 5 or 6 nominees that end up going into the best short film category, but then they choose the Ovid Award winner and take that out of the running for best short film. So you have like the best short film award and then the Ovid Award, and that's the one that we got to take home for this little 20-minute short film that we shot last year called Companion.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. I mean, it's one step in the direction that I feel like you want to go to. So all I have to say is, when you make it to the Oscars, please let me be one of your plus ones, please.
Definitely, man. I'll get you. You got to be on the red carpet with Goat Movies.
There we go.
The interviews.
I'll wear a goat head if I have to. I mean, I'll do whatever I have to. So, I mean, I'm just really excited because this is really just a step in the right direction. And I really hope that I am able to go to more screenings as VIP press. And what's great is, Andrew and I get to our seats, and it says reserve VIP seating, red wristbands only. And so we got really good seats. And how many people of the press would you say were there? I'd say it's like 20, 30 people of press. I mean, it was
Something
a pretty big
like
area.
That, yeah. It was kind of interesting. I meant to ask somebody there, but I never got a chance to. In Dallas, we have a pretty decent film festival called the USA Film Festival, and I actually got to go to it last year. But like half of the seats in the theater were reserved for USA Film Festival something. But it's interesting because the USA Film Festival was actually like 3 months ago. And so I guess like as a company or as whatever they do had some sort of affiliation with the release or a limited release of this movie. And so half the theater got to be like the USA Film Festival people. And then the other half of it was like the press, like people that like you that were there. And so, but yeah, there was probably a good 30, 40 people press.
Yeah. I mean, it was awesome. I absolutely had a great time. Let's go ahead and get started and give our ratings for this movie. We'll then go ahead and play the trailer, issue our spoiler alert, and that way we can dive a little deeper into the movie. Like I said, this one's going to be kind of difficult just because it is such on limited release. According to the information that we got, it's opening additionally in additional theaters on September the 7th. Andrew, you would know a little bit more about this, but I don't think this is going to be like a huge nationwide distribution.
No.
Where it's going to be in every theater across America. So I would say if you in your local town have like a theater that's, its specialty are these independent films. I didn't know that we had one of these. I'm not huge on indie films, but the Magnolia here in Dallas in the Weston Village, that theater, from what you were telling me, is pretty well known for that, right?
Yeah, they only have 4 theaters and they almost do exclusively smaller release movies.
Yeah, so I mean, it is an indie film. Right off the bat, I have to say, in the beginning, it was a little too artsy for me, kind of a little too poetic. Definitely something that you really have to have an open mind for. But like I was saying earlier, before we started this recording, the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I listened to some of Blaze Foley's music, the more and more it kind of grew on me. Kind of like a fine stew. You got to let it boil and you got to let it simmer for a little bit. I really enjoyed it. Before I give my score, I want to go ahead and open up the floor to you, Andrew. You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely horrible, you'd never watch it again, you never even want to bootleg it, 10 being absolutely the best movie ever. What are you going to rate this movie?
I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Like, I couldn't really get on board with it at the beginning, but as the movie went on, I started getting more into it. And then definitely after the movie ended, you know, these past couple of days, it's kind of one of those, like, just thought of it and like the feel of it is kind of stuck with me. And I really can't say too many, like, not necessarily bad things, but like criticisms of this movie. But I can definitely understand it is a movie that has like an acquired taste. Like, as much as I like this movie, I can easily acknowledge that it's a movie that I could see a lot of other people not liking just because it's not particularly their, you know, kind of thing. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, my only real criticism that I could think about it is I think it was about 15 to 20 minutes too long, which we'll probably get into that here in a little bit. But I'd probably give it probably a good 7.5.
Okay.
Are we doing the decibel system?
We're doing we always have the 0.5 system. I think that 0.5 is like that extra little gold star that you got in kindergarten, you know, the little pat on the back.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'd
you
say,
actually...
Yeah, 7.5 is probably what I would give it.
Actually, that's a very good score. That's exactly what I'm giving. It's a solid 7.5 for me too. And what's funny is, and we'll, like you said, we'll go deeper into it after the spoiler alert. Andrew and I saw this movie together. We were sitting next to each other, and at the very, very end, lights come up, credits start rolling. As they're getting Ethan Hawke seated, I kind of lean over to Andrew, and I kind of like, what the hell was that? Like, I'm so confused about what this movie was about. And so had it just stayed like that, I'd probably give this movie a little bit lower of a score. And I'm kind of glad that we sat on this for a little bit. You know, we saw this movie back on Wednesday, and today's Sunday. So as I sat on it and thought about it more and more and more, that, you know, I'm at a 7.5. And actually, this is a movie that I'll probably more than likely end up buying when it comes out on iTunes. I'll probably watch it about a time or two again.
Probably
and this is probably going to be one of those movies that it's like, yeah, let's go ahead and sit and watch it again. Without going into too much detail, I mean, it's a love story, and it's a love story that was told very, very well. You can look up all the information on Blaze Foley on Google and get some information, but his wife actually wrote a book about it. Ethan Hawke found this book, read this book. I didn't know that Ethan Hawke was a fellow Texan. He was born and raised in Austin. And so he kind of just fell in love with the story and decided to go ahead and make a movie about it. At least that's what I gathered from the research that I did. So, Andrew, you're giving it a 7.5. I'm giving it a 7.5. I think that's a very fair score. Let's go ahead and roll the trailer for this movie, after which we'll go ahead and dive a little deeper into it, okay? So without further ado, here you go, guys. Blaze.
Only one drink, big dog. I don't want any shenanigans from you tonight. Don't make me regret it.
Oh, Lord.
Okie dokie, Smoky Pokey. This next song is my wedding song.
I don't know who Blaze Foley is.
It's Blaze Foley. You really should know who Blaze was.
Didn't try to fall in love with you.
Do you think we're born knowing how to love?
Thing that I can do.
Why do we forget?
To keep myself from falling.
Ain't no living that,
Like
man.
I've done so many times.
So you gonna be a big country star?
I saw daylight in you.
I don't want to be a star. I want to be a legend.
I'm going down to the Greyhound station. Gonna get a ticket to ride.
I know it's strange. Seems like since we got married, I've been gone all the time.
Kids and sit down by side.
But I'm a salesman of songs.
Ride until the sun comes
Every song I hear about a
up.
man and woman, I think about us and cry.
Feed the pigeons and play.
The thing about Blaze,
Turn the night into day.
you understood. If you want to write a song,
You bring your ass over here, ZZ Top.
everyone's going to tell you that you got to live that song.
You're a pathetic drunk.
But that is not it.
Just sing, would you?
You're going to have to die a little. There's things that are pulling at me. They're pulling hard. I don't know why, but I have to let them take me.
The sun came up, it was another day. When the sun went down, you were blown away. Why'd you let go of your guitar? Why'd you ever let it go?
I wrote you a song.
Drunken angel.
I think my days of being your muse are over.
So good, drunk.
Well, I think they're just getting started.
Drunken angel.
I had a little bit of love, enough to put into some songs.
All right, there you have it, Blaze. Ethan Hawke actually directed this movie, and there is a website for it. It's called blazethemovie.com. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter at Blaze Movie. For Twitter, it's going to be at Blaze_movie, but for Instagram and Facebook, it is going to be Blaze Movie. I highly, highly recommend that you guys go ahead and at least follow them on social media, just so that you can see if there is a theater near you that's going to be playing this movie. Andrew, you really don't think that this is going to be a wide release, right, across the U.S. and stuff like that?
I don't think so. Not too huge. It's gonna I predict, I haven't looked into, and I'm not even sure if they actually release information like this anymore, but it'll probably hit a lot of specialty markets. Like, we're getting it in a couple of theaters here. Then it says it's going to get a wider release. What was it, September 7th, you said?
It's additional theaters are opening on September 7th here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's opening August 24th at the Magnolia in Dallas and the River Oaks Theater in Houston. And then we have, like I was saying, according to the information we have, it's opening August 31st in San Antonio, El Paso, and then the Belcourt Theater in Nashville. These are just some of the places that we have that they're opening.
So yeah, I think because it is a movie about music. It's about a musician. It is a very, very, very like Texas-based movie. I think we'll get it in a lot of theaters in Texas. Maybe not some of like your bigger Cinemark or AMC's, but definitely specialty markets. It'll probably open up a little more in Nashville, maybe a couple of theaters in New York and LA, that's just kind of if a movie gets theatrical distribution, the first two markets they usually look at for limited release are New York and LA, because those are, I think, two of the requirements to be nominated for the Oscars, and so that's usually the first one they do.
Okay.
But it's a very, very small movie. I would guess probably a budget within the $1 million range, really not that much.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things these days with movies is that you don't need to make a crap ton of money in the box office for a really small, low-budget indie movie to make your money back. So
Mm-hmm.
I think they might be releasing it in a couple of theaters just sort of like to get it out there, and then it'll go on demand sometime soon.
Well, I mean, let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to dive deep into it. This is going to be your spoiler alert.
Spoilers.
Red alert.
Anything that we discuss after this point is completely fair game. If you want to try and see this movie, go ahead and look for it. I highly recommend you go to the movie's website, blazethemovie.com. I'm sure that they'll have some information on that for you. So if you want to watch the movie, go ahead and pause the podcast and go to your local theater and see if you are fortunate enough to see it. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait until it's on Netflix or iTunes to go ahead either and rent it or buy it. I don't think you'll be disappointed if you end up having to buy it. So let's go ahead and dive head first into this movie. Like we said before, this is about a Texas songwriter named Blaze Foley, who unfortunately was killed in 1989. Andrew and I were talking a little bit about this before the podcast. It was kind of difficult to try to determine exactly the time period that this was taking place. they don't really, I don't recall the movie actually going over Blaze's childhood. And one thing I didn't get too familiar with is his name was not actually Blaze Foley, correct? Or wasn't that like
Yeah,
the name that he came up
just
with?
like his stage name that he ended up coming up with. I can't remember what was his actual name.
I'd have to
Oh,
look that information up, but Michael.
Michael David Fuller,
Okay.
according to Wikipedia. I
Okay.
don't really remember that in the movie. I remember that they actually acknowledged it in the movie, but I just didn't remember that off the top of my head.
Yeah, and his wife Sybil, who is now Sybil Rosen, they I don't think they actually ever got divorced. I know that they did get married, at least that's what they portrayed in the movies. And the one thing that I want to reiterate here is that it wasn't made too clear in the movie people's names. So it's going to be really difficult. Was I just zoning out? Because it took me a long time to even know that the girl's name was Sybil.
I kind of get where you're getting at that, because I don't think they referred to her as Sybil the entire time. I think they may have referred to her as Rosen
Mm-hmm.
for a while, but somehow, I can't remember how, but somehow I picked up on the fact that her name was Sybil.
Mm-hmm.
I picked up on his name was Blaze, it wasn't actually his name, it was like his stage name. Her name was Sybil.
Mm-hmm.
But then I couldn't really tell you too many other people's names. There was Towns Van Zant, his friend, the one that's
Mm-hmm.
telling the story. And then there was the only other one that I remember off the top of my head was Cinnamon. Remember
Mm-hmm.
Cinnamon?
Yeah. So I'm looking here at some of the information, and her name was Rosen, but that's what they called her, but that was her maiden name. So the book that this is based on, it was written by Sybil Rosen. And so I'm assuming that Blaze would call her Rosen and she would call him Blaze. And there was just a lot of that back and forth in this movie. Because the one thing that I admired about this movie, and the one thing that I admired about Blaze and Sybil, is that they found each other in a very unique way. I guess he was like just kind of doing contract work or something, and he was there when she was practicing to be an actress. She was going over some lines. She probably had some sort of audition, but I guess this was like a group or a camp or something, because it was an older building. And Andrew, help me out here, because somebody yells, they're like in a group circle kind of practicing talking, and somebody yells out, he's got a gun, and everybody bolts out of this building. And these two end up in a closet where he's trying to illuminate the room using a lighter. Did you see anybody with a gun? They never showed anything like that.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure if it was actually somebody with a gun or if it was like an acting exercise that was going on.
Like
I
playing
didn't really,
improv or something.
yeah, like I didn't even really pick up on the fact that somebody said he has a gun. I didn't hear that. But I mean,
somebody
I don't hear
yelled
a
it
lot of
out.
things.
Apparently there was some sort of argument. What I gathered from what I saw is that there was some sort of argument in a room upstairs or something, and he's got a gun, run, and everybody just runs out of this little wooden church. It's like a top of a hill somewhere out in the woods here in Texas somewhere. So and they kind of just it was kind of like a love at first sight, and it was very actually beautiful. And I have to commend Ethan Hawke on this, because I've never seen a movie where a love story was so prominent. I'm even at a loss for words of how to explain it. The love that Sybil and Blaze had for each other was just so beautifully expressed throughout the entire movie. Yeah. And the big thing about this movie is that it's kind of telling the same story from 3 or 4 different angles, or 3 or 4 different times.
Yeah, so the way the story is told is I'm guessing what you would call the present. So it's 2 of his friends who are being interviewed for a radio show. And so they kind of act as the narrators of the story, but then they flash back to Blaze's final performance at this little dive bar to an audience of like 4 people. It's his final performance, like the night that he gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get snippets of the 2 guys talking about that performance, but then as we flash back to that performance and Blaze starts playing songs, we start flashing back to different parts in him and Sybil's life that inspired him to write those songs. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like a twofold flashback where we go very, very non-linear type story.
And you know what a fan I am of movies that jump around like that. You know, I just absolutely love when that happens.
And it's so hard to pull off.
It is. It's very difficult.
I've seen so many movies that try to be Quentin Tarantino, but it's just painfully obvious that they're just trying and they don't really understand how that kind of story structure works. But with a movie like this, it wasn't really about the story. There really isn't too much of like a beginning, middle, and end like narrative, like a first act, second act, third act narrative. It was very much just sort of like these little vignettes into the different parts of this guy's life that inspired him to write these songs. And then these 2 guys just telling somebody about it. And so it didn't really have to follow any particular kind of story structure. But I think that's what made it more interesting to me, is that there wasn't like a really definite beginning, middle, and end. It was just, these are some cool things that happened to this guy that inspired him to write these songs. So let's listen to these songs, and then these guys are going to talk about it. But I just, it was a really, really, really cool way to tell that kind of narrative, and I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, it was. It was actually really well done. I wanna hit home a little bit about, you know, this first scene that we kind of see. We see Charlie Sexton, who is portraying Van Zandt, and he's kind of having this interview about Foley, right? About Blaze, and he and his friend, and I don't know the name of the actor who played him, the friend.
I can't remember who that was.
But the one thing I kind of want to get this insight from you, Andrew. I feel like the entire time that Van Zandt is doing this interview, that his friend is kind of looking at him like, why are you saying that? Or why are you doing this? Like,
yeah,
sort of like resentment towards Van Zandt.
Yeah, I kind of got that too. And I suspect, because it's never really acknowledged why, for whatever reason, he seems like he doesn't approve of what his friend is saying about Blaze in this interview.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never really, the interesting thing about it is that it's never really explained explicitly in the movie, but I feel like we ended up getting a little more information about that after the movie during the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was kind of addressed by the Q&A, not like Ethan Hawke kind of addressed it, not directly, but it was just like a little extra tidbit of information that I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for some reason, like, it's never really explained in the movie, as far as I know, why the other guy just doesn't really want to be doing the interview, because he doesn't really say anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got this interview that's going on, and then they do, you know, flashbacks to Blaze's last performance. From what I can tell, Blaze is an alcoholic. He is completely drunk at his last performance, and he's really just, again, this is just what I got from the movie. He is really remorseful that he's no longer with Sybil. And he's kind of just going through his life through his final performance, which to me kind of is indicative that he had, on some level, kind of felt or knew that something was about to happen. I don't want to say that he knew that he was going to be killed or anything like that. But I guess from what I gathered from the movie, he was one to always defend his friends. And there was a friend that he had that his son, I don't understand the dynamic there, but his friend's son would come and take his friend's money that he would get monthly and just really abuse his father. And so Blaze stood up for him, and there was a gunfight, and Blaze ended up shot and getting killed. One of the key things that I wanted to touch up on, and then I get sidetracked, and that's something that I struggle with a lot, is I start down one road trying to make one point, and I end up completely down the other road, is that the point that I wanted to make earlier, and it's kind of coming full circle here, is Blaze had such a love for music that he didn't care, and they say it a bunch of times in the movie. He didn't care about making money. He didn't care about any of that. And there's this huge portion of the movie where Sybil and Blaze are living in this little shack out in the middle of the woods, no electricity. They had running water, they had food. I don't know how they made their money, but he was happy. He was totally, completely happy. And I feel like one of the main songs that really moved me and touched me, and I've actually been listening to it on loop since Wednesday. I mean, I have just listened to it over and over and over again to the point that I basically have it memorized, is I Should Have Been Home With You. And
oh yeah, that was a good one.
They actually played it in a part where Sybil and Blaze have left this little shack in the woods. They're now in an apartment in a little town, so they're not really city slickers. They're not into, the city. They like being out by themselves. So they're in this little town. Sybil is taking on a job that she's a waitress, and so they played it while Blaze is trying to make money making his music, playing at little dive bars and stuff like that. And I guess he had like an affair. He met women along the way, and he's kind of regretful from that. And the more that I sit here and I think about the movie and think about the song and look back on it, yes, he's remorseful that he had these other relationships with other women when his true love was Sybil. But I feel like the message that he's trying to get across with this song is that he should have been home with you, Sybil, but that's not their home. That apartment that they're in is not their home. The shack out in the woods where it's just them keeping each other warm along the fire, where they're just holding each other and just loving each other without a worry in the world. I think that's what he was trying to say in that movie, in that song.
Yeah,
Blaze.
And what I thought was really, really cool is he comes back, like he's been on the road doing some music, doing some gigs where it's very strongly implied that he's been hooking up with these other women while she's at home working, as a waitress. Well, he comes home and she's not there, like she's at work, and so he feels all of this remorse for all that he's done, and he's just like pissed drunk or whatever. And so he comes up with this idea for the song, but he's too drunk to find anything to write it on. Mm-hmm. So it just cuts to Sybil coming home, and there are just song lyrics for the song just written all over, covering all of the walls, because he couldn't find anything to write it to. I just thought that was a really, really, really cool scene. Just her coming home, and there are just these lyrics just written all over the walls like a madman, and she finds him passed out in the bathtub.
Mm-hmm. And he was passed out. He was just completely and totally drunk. And what's funny is one of the lyrics, it says, "I got home at daylight, I know I've been gone too long, woke up at 11 and I found that you had gone, drank a pot of coffee and I wrote down this song, I Should Have Been Home With You." So again, he knew that while he was doing what he loved Sybil more, and he should have been home with her rather than, going out. And who knows, maybe he had a kind of sense of what we would call in Mexican culture machismo, where it's like, I'm the man, I should be earning this money, I should be providing for us. And maybe that's what he was doing that. And she kind of understood that that's what he wanted to do. And she, I don't want to say was enabling him, but she was trying to help him achieve his dreams of becoming the successful songwriter.
Yeah, see, I kind of got the sense that it was more of an unfulfilled potential kind of thing, like she realized how talented he was, and she not necessarily enabled him, but definitely pushed him to be more than just the guy in the woods writing songs that nobody's ever going to hear, because it was her idea
To
to move
move.
out of the woods and
Mhm.
to closer to, I think Austin is where they said, like, not maybe not Austin, but like closer to Austin.
Yeah, the outskirts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what were some of your favorite scenes that you saw in the movie, or some of the things that you'd like to discuss that really stood out to you, Andrew?
I can't really think of too many specific ones right now, but there were definitely really, really clever moments in the editing as to how they would tie the final performance back to the time where the song was being written, like what inspired that song to be written, and just the way it goes back and forth a couple of times. I remember thinking like, oh, that was a really interesting choice, like that was a really clever, like, um creative decision by Ethan Hawke and uh whoever the editor was. I don't remember. I ended up looking it up, but I can't remember his name.
Well, what's funny is during our question and answer round, Ethan Hawke had mentioned that he had gotten rid of the script supervisor, or is that?
Yes. So it was so low budget that he was looking to cut costs for anything. Like, what can they save money? And as an actor, actors hate the script supervisor, because the script supervisor, or the scripty, you call him the scripty, is in charge of continuity. So, like, if you've got a scene that takes place like at a dinner table or whatever, they're the ones that keep track of, oh, on this specific line, you were holding the glass in your right hand, and so that's the shot that the director wanted. So now for every other take in this entire scene on that specific line, you have to pick up the glass with your right hand. Like, they are basically the grammar Nazis of a scene. Like, that's who they are. But
Yeah.
in turn, while they're doing that, they are taking notes for the editor. So they take like which specific line that the director thought was the best, like whatever, yada yada yada, pages and pages of notes they just write all over the script, and then they hand that to the editor, so the editor knows what he's doing whenever it's his chance to edit. Well, Ethan Hawke didn't realize that the script supervisor was the one that gives the notes to the editor. He just thought he was cutting the person that tells all the actors what they need to do on every single shot. And it wasn't until, I think he said, like halfway through shooting the movie, Richard Linklater actually has a cameo in the movie. Like, Richard Linklater, he's worked with Richard Linklater for like the past 25 years as an actor, but he finally got a chance to direct Richard Linklater in a movie. And so Richard Linklater shows up on set and he's like, hey, where's the scripty? And Ethan's like, we cut him. We didn't need him. Oh, well, then who's giving notes to your editor? Oh, yeah. So they had like half of the movie where nobody was writing down anything, especially for a movie that's told as non-linear as this one does. He just basically said the editing process of this movie was a nightmare. Like, he felt so bad for what he was getting his editor into. But in turn, like, they ended up, I think that may have actually helped them, because they made a lot of really, really interesting choices of how they would transition from one time period to the next, like within a song. And so I just thought a lot of those little moments were really, really clever.
Yeah, they were. I wanna kind of elaborate on that really, really quick on this, and you kind of have to have some backstory here. So one thing that I was very, very surprised at while we were here, they bring out Ethan Hawke and Ben Dickey. This is moderated by the Dallas Morning News. He asks a question or two, which I thought there would be more questions from the moderator, but I guess I was wrong on there. And then they kind of open it up to the public. And one thing that I had told myself, kind of like pre-game for my own, and I don't know if you know this or not, Andrew, but I didn't want to ruin any relationships or any possibility of future chances to screen movies and get to meet these actors and directors and stuff. So I don't know enough about Ethan Hawke's history to have an intelligent conversation about it. I had never even heard of Blaze Foley before I got the invitation to go watch this movie, so I can't have an intelligent conversation about him. So I told myself, do not ruin this for yourself. Do not open your mouth. Do not say anything. Don't get starstruck, because Ethan Hawke is a celebrity. And so they open it up to the audience to ask questions, and not a single person had a question. Not one. And I just kind of looked around, and I noticed you were looking around too to see if anybody had any questions, and not one person raised their hand. How can we be in the press section and nobody have a question?
Yeah, that really, really surprised me.
So of course, I had to be the hero, and I stuck my hand out, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And I had to ask my question. And one of the questions that I asked was if there was a particular song, because this is about a songwriter, if there was a particular song or songs that meant something or touched them in a certain way that, made the movie. And so Ben Dickey was talking about the songs that he enjoyed because, he did portray the man, Blaze Foley. And Ethan Hawke's response to this was very beautiful. And this is where he turned the oven to simmer, the stove to simmer, so that I started kind of enjoying this movie more and more as I thought about it. He made reference to the fact that he chose these particular songs because they kind of stand as markers for whatever is being talked about at that point in time in Blaze's life. And the example that he used is that if you go into a Catholic church, you've got these beautiful stained glass windows. And I believe he said St. Francis was the one that he used as an example. You have St. Francis in the middle of the stained glass window. Somebody throws a rock through it, and now you have to put the stained glass back together. And it's going to be very difficult for you to put back together. But a lot of these stained glass windows have the story of St. Francis depicted by little smaller stained glass pictures of miracles that they used or stories that they have in their life. And that's what these songs are. They're the markers for what was happening in Blaze's life, which that to me was just so, so beautiful.
He made... Oh, keep going.
That was what I was trying to say, is that it was just so beautiful the way that he said it. And the more and more you think about it and you listen to the words of the song, because like I said, I Should Have Been Home With You is to me my favorite song in the entire movie. And I've been listening to it over and over and over again. And if you actually hear, I don't know if it was actually Blaze Foley singing in the movie or if it was Ben Dickey.
I'm pretty sure it was Ben Dickey doing all of the stuff.
Pretty sure it was too. If you go out to YouTube, and I'll go ahead and put a link for that music video in this podcast, because I really want people to have the opportunity to listen to it. If you hear Ben Foley's voice, and you may not hear it the very first time, but you for sure will hear it the second or third time, you hear the love that he has for Sybil, and you know that he's singing this to Sybil. And there's a very powerful scene where Blaze has been gone for a while. He comes back and he finds Sybil on a typewriter in their bed, and they have this exchange with each other, and basically Sybil is like, I can't be your muse anymore, and she is just so heartbroken because she knows that this is kind of the end. And they never really said that they got divorced, but they just really went their own separate ways.
Yeah.
And that Blaze is just heartbroken because throughout the entire movie, he's just reminiscing and thinking about the times that they spent together.
Going off of that, one thing I thought was really cool is that Ethan Hawke made a very, very specific point to say that even though, like, this is a biopic, this is about the real life person Blaze Foley, the story isn't exactly like true. It's not exactly like a true story. It's very much inspired by, like, it is the story inspired by these songs that he wrote. and it kind of ties into the radio interview that the two friends are doing, where one of them is telling these stories about Blaze and the other one is just kind of like, what are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
It's very kind of like the inception of these sort of myths, like these stories that people tell about people, and there's like no real way to tell if they're true or not. And Blaze himself in the movie is a storyteller. He just kind of goes off on a tangent and goes on for 5 minutes to talk about like this story that happened with his dad that ends up being just like a punchline to a joke. That
I
you're like,
loved
is
it.
that true or not? Yeah, that was hilarious. I thought that one was
They
hilarious.
had so much good humor just kind of sprinkled throughout, and I really hope that Blaze Foley was really like that, because I can see that. A lot of Texans are like that. They just go off on a story and you're like, really? Oh my gosh. And then they give the punchline and you're just like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, was that real? Or somebody that really reminds me of that is your dad. Your dad, John,
Really?
he goes off on all these stories and all these things, and I'm just like, what? Where are you coming up with this stuff, John? And your brother Nick, he's great. When I first met him, he would start going off of, oh yeah, like a huge example that I always give is like, oh, I wonder who invented the spoon. And Nick would just go off. Well, the spoon was actually invented by Robert Schindler, and he was actually a geneticist who was having issues, and he just makes it so believable. And you're just like, wow, Nick, you're so knowledgeable. How'd you know that? And he goes, oh, I didn't. And then you're just like, what? Like, you just spent 5 minutes telling me the history of how the spoon was invented, and now you're telling me that all of that was bullshit. It was beautiful. The comedy in this movie that's sprinkled throughout it is great.
Yeah, and so it kind of ties into Ethan Hawke's like the way he described his process in making this movie and writing it actually with Sybil. She actually co-wrote the screenplay, and it kind of like one of my favorite parts of the movie is it's one of the first parts of the interview that we get with these two guys on the radio, where one of them is telling the story about this guitar that Dickie
I love this.
Dickie,
I love this
Blaze
story that he gave. Yeah.
used to own. And so he finds this guitar at a pawn shop after Blaze had died, and the dude at the pawn shop wants like $1,200 for it. And so the guy's like,
So just before you go on, we have to reiterate, Blaze Foley was not a rich man.
oh,
He did
no.
not. He didn't have much money, and so I think what they were saying is that he would borrow these from pawn shops.
Yes,
But this guy found this guitar. So go ahead.
He found the guitar at a pawn shop, but the guy at the pawn shop wanted $1,200 for it. And so he was just like, I'm not going to pay $1,200, but I know that this is Dickie's guitar, and I know that he probably borrowed it from the pawn shop or whatever. I'll bet you he still has the pawn shop receipt or the slip for it.
The
or
claim
whatever.
ticket.
The claim ticket. Well, I know for a fact that it was probably in his jacket pocket, like the one jacket that he had. He always had it with him. I bet you it's in there. So he tells the story that he actually goes to the cemetery, digs up the grave of his friend Blaze, and sure enough, the ticket is in his jacket, puts him back in the ground, goes to the pawn shop and gets the guitar, and he's sitting there in the radio interview with this guitar the entire movie.
And that's where you see the friend looking at him like, wait, what?
Why? What are you doing? And so, but that kind of goes into the whole aspect of telling a story to kind of have somebody's memory live on past them, because it's such a ridiculous story. It can't be true. I mean, the way it's presented to us as the audience, to me, it's obviously not true, but because of who it is, because it's Blaze they're talking about, and all of his songs, these stories they tell, it's like there's that little like kind of voice in the back of your head that says it's probably not true, but you can totally see somebody digging up his grave just to get the receipt so they don't have to pay for the guitar.
And it kind of comes full circle throughout, because you see how crazy his friends were, and the craziness that they get themselves into, that you wouldn't put it past them. It was awesome. And the one thing you left out, which I thought kind of brought this whole thing together, and maybe you missed it or maybe I misinterpreted, but he said when he opened the coffin and checked the Blaze's breast pocket and there was the ticket, that he looked up at Blaze's face
Oh,
and he
yeah.
was grinning. And that to me, that's like Blaze's last hurrah. Like, huh, I knew you were going to come for this. And so, but that just goes to show how cheap Blaze was, that he only had one jacket. That's all they had to bury him in. And just the funniness that, oh, he was grinning in his grave because he knew his friend would come back for that ticket.
Yeah, and he had an opportunity to be huge and successful. There are a couple of like oil tycoon guys that start their own record label, and they want Blaze to be the first person on their record label, and so they actually sign with him. But this is around the time that him and Sybil separate, and so he does his whole drunken shenanigans, ends up blowing it.
And who were the three tycoons? One was Sam Rockwell.
Sam Rockwell. I love Sam Rockwell. I was so pumped to see him in this movie because it's a very like low key cameo. Like his name's not in the credits or whatever, but it was Sam Rockwell, Steve Zahn, and then Richard Linklater was the main guy.
Mm-hmm. And they offer him this position, this great opportunity, and Blaze blows it. I mean, he really does. And in the beginning of the movie, he's recording with his friend, and he's just acting a fool. There's no better way to say that. He's just acting a fool.
Just drunk in the studio, yeah.
And I think Blaze is a perfect name for him because he is just burning bridges after he crosses them.
Yeah, it makes several points to tell you that this bar that he's playing at for his last performance to like an audience of 5 people is the last place in town that'll let him in, because every time he goes up on stage, he just ends up getting drunk and beating the crap out of somebody.
Yeah. And what's funny is throughout the performance, he kind of just goes off on tangents. And then
like in the middle of songs, he'll just stop in the middle of songs to just kind of like chill out and tell a story, and then like, oh yeah, so here's the rest of the song, and then just continues going.
As if nothing, as if it was all meant to be. So, all in all, I really enjoyed it. And like I said, when it comes out on iTunes, I'm almost positive I'm going to end up buying it and watching it again. And I'm sure, or I'm hoping that the next time I watch it, I'll be able to see a little bit more and really appreciate the movie a little bit more. But just to kind of wrap things up and bring it all together, it's a beautiful love story. Beautiful song. I'm going to put the link in the description below. And let's just go ahead and give our final thoughts here. You gave it a 7.5 earlier in the review. What are your thoughts now that we've discussed it a little bit, Andrew?
I'll probably still sit firm at a 7.5. Like I said, my only main criticism about it is that it was probably about 15 or 20 minutes too long. In fact, let me just look up really quick and see how long it was.
2 hours and 7 minutes long.
Okay, yeah. So I'd probably say about 15, 20 minutes long. They're, like we said earlier, the characters just kind of go off on a tangent every once in a while and tell these stories, and each story ends up having a punchline where it's kind of like, was that a real story or just a joke? And so as enjoyable as a lot of those moments were, I think a couple of them just kind of went on a little bit too long. You could have cut 1 or 2 of those, and the movie just probably would have brought the movie up to like an 8.5 for me. Mm-hmm. But just really, really well acted, especially considering that this main guy, Ben Dickey, isn't even an actor. He's a musician. Mm-hmm. And then Sybil, who was played by, I can never remember how to pronounce her name. Aaliyah Shawkat, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. She best known as Maybe from Arrested Development, but she did a great job. It was very, very well directed, well edited, well shot. I mean, it's just a really, really very intimate and emotional, and sometimes pretty funny, just low-key movie about this musician that almost nobody's heard of. And the only thing I could say to people is I think whether or not you enjoy this movie will just depend on whether or not this movie is your kind of thing. Like, I could easily compare this to something like a John Carney movie, if you know who he is. He did movies like Once. He did Begin Again with Keira Knightley and Mark Ruffalo. He did Sing Street. And mm-hmm. So you could almost call this movie a musical in that respect, even though it's not like a musical. It's just a movie that revolves around the music that's being played in it. And so it's all this guy's, it's great soundtrack, folk, like country music, just where, like the kind of music where songs are stories. It's not just like a song for whatever, like the songs tell stories. And so, but it was just, I was impressed. I've known that Ethan Hawke has directed some movies in the past. I'm not too familiar with the movies that he's directed. I only know of them. I've never seen them, but I was impressed. I thought everybody on this movie did a really, really good job. And so, yeah, my only main thing about it is that about 15, 20 minutes shorter, and it probably would have gotten an 8.5 from me, but I'll stick it at 7.5.
That's awesome.
I really liked it.
I'm going to stick with my 7.5 also. I agree with you. Again, I'm not too shocked that this movie was 2 hours long because, I mean, in today's world, what isn't 2 hours long? I think if it had been a little bit shorter, it would have been great. My final thoughts on the movie is, I've said it time and time again, it's a beautiful, beautiful love story, great music. One of the lines that Blaze is having, he's having a conversation with Sybil, and I think it was in the trailer as well. And he tells her, he goes, "I don't want to be a star, I want to be a legend." And she kind of looks at him and says, "Well, what's the difference? What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, a star burns bright for itself, and but it burns out and people forget about it. But a legend lives on forever." And it kind of just, when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's true. It really does. And kind of reminded me of the line in The Sandlot, heroes get remembered, but legends never die. So, and that's true. And one of the comments that Ethan Hawke had made in his question and answer is that he worked with Sybil Rosen on this, who was his wife, and she's kind of doing this for him. And there's at the very, very end, right where we see Blaze die, he's kind of struggling, and he's holding his gunshot wound, and he's dying, and he kind of looks up at the streetlight, and he dies underneath the streetlight and says, "Please don't let me die." And I don't think that he was saying, like, please don't let me die, like him personally. In some way or another, I felt like he was talking to Sybil and just saying, like, please help me become the legend that I wanted to be. Please don't let my story die here. And I think that's what he was talking about. That's what I got from it.
I kind of got that.
And that's kind of the passion. And to see that Ethan Hawke was just so passionate about this movie really, drove this for me and really made me really, really enjoy this movie. So all in all, 7.5 is what we're giving it. All in all, great movie. I really don't think you'll be disappointed if you see it in theaters. I really don't think you'll be disappointed if you find it on iTunes and end up buying it. If the funny thing is, when you rent a movie on iTunes, the rentals are like $4 or $5 each. 9 times out of 10, these movies are either $9, $12. Because I hardly ever buy a movie that's $20. Right? So if you're going to spend the $5 to rent it and only watch it once, you might as well just fork over the $4 extra and buy it.
Have it forever.
Yeah, and just have it forever and watch it as many times as you want. But yeah, I absolutely, absolutely loved this movie. So 7.5 for me as well. That's going to do it for this edition of GOAT Movies. I really want to thank Andrew for coming on the show. Andrew, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, man. Anytime.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you would like for us to go ahead and review a certain movie, or if you'd like to be a host on the show, remember that you can always email me at goatmoviespc@gmail.com. That's goatmovies, plural, pc@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at goatmoviespc and stay up to date with anything related to the podcast. Remember to please rate, comment, like, subscribe to this podcast so that we can keep more of these going. And remember to share it with your friends. Thanks again for listening. You guys have a great one, and I'll see you all next week.